Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for 3,000 subscribers. Seriously, you all have been amazing, thank you. Alright, now let's dive into today's story. I've always been a bit of a night owl. The kind of person who stays up late scrolling aimlessly on the internet, procrastinating on things that don't even matter. That's how this whole nightmare started. Just another late night, another rabbit hole. I was lying on my bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. The room was dim except for the glow of the screen, and the faint hum of the ceiling fan added a kind of stillness to the air. I'd been flipping between Reddit threads and YouTube videos, not really paying attention to anything in particular. My brain was on autopilot. Then I saw it. A notification popped up on my screen. Not an ad, not an email, just a small plain box with a link and 5 cryptic words. For the curious only. Click. I stared at it, confused. There wasn't a sender or any indication of where it came from. It wasn't spam. It didn't look like anything that belonged on my laptop. My instincts told me to close it. Stuff like this, it's never good. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. That little voice in the back of my head whispered, "What's the harm?" Against my better judgment, I clicked. The screen went black for a moment, and then a simple website loaded. It was stark. Just a plain background with a single button in the center that said, "Enter stream." Underneath, there was a warning in bold red letters. Viewer discretion advised. Graphic content ahead. Proceed at your own risk. My heart started to race. By now I knew I was on some sketchy part of the internet, probably the dark web. My stomach turned, but my hand moved to the trackpad anyway. Click. The stream took a few seconds to load. At first it was just a dark, grainy room. A single spotlight illuminated a metal chair in the center. The walls were concrete, damp and cracked, and there were dark stains on the floor I didn't want to think about. The chat on the side of the screen was alive with activity. Dozens of people were typing in real time. Finally, been waiting all day for this. I hope this one screams louder than the last. Who's ready for the show? My skin crawled. What the hell was I looking at? Then, the camera zoomed in, and the victim appeared. A man, bound and blindfolded, was tied to the chair. He was shaking violently, his muffled cries barely audible over the buzzing noise in the background. A figure stepped into the frame. They were tall, dressed in black, with a featureless mask covering their face. In one hand, they held a scalpel. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The masked figure wasted no time. They approached the bound man with a calculated calmness, running the blade of the scalpel along his arm without making a cut. It was almost like they were savoring the moment, building anticipation. For the audience, I realized. The chat went wild. Here we go. Make it slow this time. Let's see some blood. The masked figure tilted their head as if reading the comments, and then made their first cut. It wasn't deep, just enough to draw blood, but the man's reaction was immediate. He thrashed against his restraints, screaming into the gag around his mouth. "Shh," the figure said softly, their voice distorted by a voice modulator. "This will only hurt a lot." I wanted to close the tab, to turn off my laptop and pretend I'd never seen this, but I couldn't move. It was like my body was paralyzed, my eyes glued to the screen. The torture escalated. The masked figure carved into the man with surgical precision, avoiding vital areas to keep him alive as long as possible. His screams grew hoarser, more desperate, until they were nothing but ragged gasps. Then they brought out the blowtorch. My stomach lurched as they ignited the flame, the bright orange glow reflecting off the man's tear-streaked face. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. But there was no stopping it. The figure pressed the torch to the man's skin, starting at his arms and moving to his chest. His body convulsed violently, the smell of burning flesh almost tangible through the screen. The chat was loving it. "Yes. Turn him to ash. This is art." I felt sick. By the time they finally stopped, the man was unrecognizable. His charred body slumped in the chair, smoke rising from his blackened skin. But he was still alive. Barely. The masked figure stepped back, retrieving a sledgehammer from the shadows. With a single bone-crushing swing, they ended it. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The images played on a loop in my mind. The screams, the blood, the fire. It was like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. I had to tell someone. That someone was Jake, my best friend since childhood. He was the kind of guy who could make light of anything, the kind of person you needed when the world felt too heavy. When I told him about the stream, he laughed at first. "Yeah, okay," he said, rolling his eyes. "You're messing with me." "I'm not joking," I said, my voice shaking. "It was real, Jake. I saw it. I saw everything." He frowned, his playful demeanor fading. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He hesitated, then said, "Show me." I didn't want to show Jake. A part of me felt like pulling him into this nightmare would somehow make it worse. But I needed him to believe me. I needed someone else to carry the weight of what I'd seen because I couldn't do it alone anymore. We were in my room. Jake sat on the edge of my bed, his hands resting on his knees. I opened the laptop, my stomach churning with dread. "I don't think we should be watching this," I muttered, hesitating as I hovered over the link. "Dude, you already dragged me into this," Jake replied. "Just show me." Reluctantly, I clicked. The stream loaded almost instantly. Same dark room, same metal chair in the center. But this time, there was a new victim. It was a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her face was bruised, her lips split, and her hands were bound so tightly her fingers were turning blue. Jake's jaw clenched. "What the hell is this?" "I told you," I said quietly, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. The masked figure entered the frame, carrying a small toolbox. They moved with the same eerie calmness I'd seen before, as if they'd done this 100 times. The woman started to cry, her muffled sobs barely audible over the distorted laughter coming from the chat. "Fresh meat. Let's make this one last. Rip her apart." Jake stared at the screen, his face pale. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It's real," I whispered, I told you. The masked figure knelt in front of the woman, opening the toolbox to reveal a collection of knives, pliers, and other tools I didn't want to name. They selected a bone saw, running their gloved fingers along the blade as if testing its sharpness. "Oh my God," Jake breathed. The torture started slow. They made small cuts along her arms and legs, drawing out the process as much as possible. Then they used the pliers to break her fingers one by one, the sickening crack echoing through the room. Jake shot up from the bed. "Turn it off." "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "For what?" he snapped. "You want to watch this? What the hell is wrong with you?" Before I could answer, the masked figure moved onto her legs. They used the bone saw to cut through her thigh, stopping every few inches to inject her with something from a syringe. "She's awake," Jake whispered, horrified. "She's still awake." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The masked figure didn't stop until both her legs were gone. By the time they moved to her arms, Jake couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the laptop and slammed it shut. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jake shouted, pacing back and forth. I flinched at the anger in his voice. "I didn't do this, Jake. I just..." "You just what? Decided to watch people get tortured for fun?" "I didn't know what it was when I clicked on it," I yelled back. "And now I don't know how to stop." Jake stopped pacing and stared at me, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You shouldn't have shown me that." "I needed you to believe me," I said quietly. "Well, I do now," he muttered. "And I wish I didn't." He sat back down on the bed, his head in his hands. After a moment, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. "This is sick," he said. "Who are these people? And why the hell are they doing this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't think we're supposed to know." Jake opened the laptop again, his hands trembling. "I need to say something." "What?" I asked, alarmed. "These people need to know how messed up they are," he said. "Jake, no," I said quickly. "You don't mess with these people. You don't even interact with them." But he didn't listen. He opened the chat and started typing furiously. "You're all sick. Deranged freaks. What the hell is wrong with you people? You deserve to be arrested and locked up for life." The chat went quiet. And then a new message appeared. "We see you, Jake." My blood ran cold. Jake froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "How do they..." Before he could finish, the masked figure on the stream turned to the camera. They tilted their head, as if looking directly at us. "Jake Wilson," they said. Then, they flat out said his address out loud. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. "That's my address," Jake whispered. "And you, Thomas Allen." The figure continued, then continued with my full address. Jake slammed the laptop shut, his face pale. "How do they know?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, Jake got a message on his phone. The text contained a set of GPS coordinates, along with every piece of personal information about him. His full name, address, date of birth, bank details, even the passwords to his emails. He showed me the message, his hands shaking. It's them, he said. I nodded, unable to speak. They want me to go there, he said, his voice trembling. They're inviting me to their little torture chamber. You're not going, I said firmly. He looked at me, his eyes wide and desperate. We can't just ignore this. They know everything about me, about us. And what are you going to do? Walk into their trap? I'm bringing a gun, he said. I'll kill them. You'll get yourself killed, I snapped. Maybe, he said. But I'd rather die fighting than sit here doing nothing. We argued for hours. I tried to convince him to let it go, to call the police, to do anything but go to that location. Are you stupid? I shouted. Do you even realize what you're saying? Plus, it's a 5-hour drive. I don't care, he said. This needs to end. Jake paced back and forth in my living room, the tension in the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. He kept glancing at his phone, at the coordinates in the cryptic message, as if they were mocking him. I can't just sit here and do nothing, he said, his voice sharp with frustration. We know where this psycho is. We know he's still out there doing this, torturing people. How can you just sit there and act like it's not our problem? I rubbed my temples, trying to calm myself down. Jake, you're acting like we're in some action movie. What do you think is going to happen? You show up, wave a gun around, and suddenly the bad guy surrenders? This isn't going to go the way you think. I don't care how it goes, Jake snapped. I can't live with myself knowing I didn't at least try to stop him. Stop him? I repeated, my voice rising. You're walking into a trap. This guy clearly knows everything about us, our names, our addresses. Hell, he probably knows what brand of toothpaste we use. He's not some idiot hiding in a basement, Jake. He's planned this. Jake threw his hands up. So what? We just let him keep going? We just ignore it and hope he doesn't come for us next? I stood up, my frustration boiling over. Yes, Jake. Yes, that's exactly what we do. Because the alternative is you driving 5 hours to get yourself killed. Do you even hear yourself right now? He shook his head, his jaw tightening. You don't get it. You didn't see the look on those people's faces. You didn't see the fear, the pain. I can't just unsee that. I have to do something, man. I saw it too, I said quietly. And I can't unsee it either. But running into this blindly isn't going to help anyone. It's just going to make things worse. Jake turned away, his shoulders slumping. You're such a coward, he muttered under his breath. That stung more than I wanted to admit. Excuse me? You heard me, he said, spinning back to face me. His eyes were blazing with anger. You're scared, so you're making excuses. If it were anyone else, you'd be all in. But because it's real, because it's dangerous, you're backing out. I stepped closer to him, my voice low and firm. You're damn right I'm scared, Jake. I'm scared because I don't want to lose my best friend to some psycho on the internet. And if you weren't so blinded by your own hero complex, you'd realize how stupid this plan is. We stared at each other in silence, the air between us crackling with unspoken tension. Finally, Jake sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I get it, he said, his voice softer now. You're scared. But I can't just let this go. I have to do something. I shook my head. You don't have to do anything, Jake. You're not a cop. You're not a vigilante. You're just a guy who got pulled into something way bigger than he can handle. Let it go, please. But he didn't let it go. "I'm going," he said finally, his voice resolute. "With or without you. I just thought you'd have my back." And with that he turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, feeling more helpless than ever. The days that followed Jake's departure blurred together into a haze of worry and dread. I tried calling him the next morning, then the next, and the next after that, but it always went straight to voicemail. Every message I left felt more desperate than the last. "Jake, call me back. Please. Just tell me you're okay." But there was no response. I spent hours scouring the internet, hoping to find some trace of him, some mention of what might have happened. The live stream was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. No replays, no forums discussing it, not even a whisper in the dark corners of the web where it had thrived. It was as if the whole thing had been scrubbed from existence. I thought about going to the police, but what could I say? That my friend disappeared chasing after a cryptic message from a live stream that tortured people? They'd laugh me out of the station, or worse, think I was involved. The guilt was suffocating. I replayed that argument over and over in my mind, wishing I'd done something different, said something to make him stay. Maybe if I'd gone with him, things would have turned out differently. Or maybe we'd both be missing. The days turned into weeks. Jake's family filed a missing persons report, and I sat through an excruciating police interview. They asked me 100 questions, and I answered as vaguely as I could without outright lying. I told them Jake had been stressed, that he mentioned going on a trip to clear his head. They seemed to buy it, or at least they didn't press further. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It was subtle at first. A car parked too long across the street, the shadow of movement outside my window late at night. I convinced myself it was just paranoia, the after effects of everything we'd been through. Then, 3 months after Jake disappeared, I started getting strange calls. The number was always blocked, and no one ever spoke on the other end. Just heavy breathing, sometimes a faint clicking sound, like someone typing on a keyboard. I stopped answering after the 3rd call, but they kept coming. By the 4th month, I was barely sleeping. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows sent my heart racing. I started locking every door and window in the house, double-checking them before bed. But it didn't help. And then, it happened. One night, as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it instinctively, squinting against the bright screen. It was a message. At first, I thought it might be Jake. My heart leapt with hope as I opened it, but that hope quickly turned to cold, paralyzing fear. The message contained my full name, my address, my date of birth, my bank details, even the passwords to my email accounts. And then, beneath all of that, coordinates. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. My breath came in shallow gasps as the reality of it sank in. Whoever sent the message knew everything about me. They had been watching me this whole time, waiting. Jake's face flashed in my mind, his determination as he walked out of my door for the last time. I wonder if he'd felt the same cold dread that I was feeling now.